Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Regressive Soapbox. Let's talk about Seth Rich. And if I'm being honest, I have to be honest, I don't like talking about this particular case, even though this case has to be talked about. I feel for the family on this. So I'm always hesitant about, look, anybody who's, any aspect of media, and I guess to some degree I'm an aspect of media. I would consider myself this kind of blurring between art and media, but in this particular case, media. There is an overarching thing of incentives, and I know I talk about this a lot because but I make this argument that incentives are this thing that prods you along the process. It's the prevailing win. There is an incentive for the media to talk about a particular case. Now, sometimes there's an incentive for the media to not talk about a particular case, meaning on both sides, there are incentives. It just depends on what the people want to achieve, if that makes sense. Mainstream media doesn't like the story. It hates the story. The Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the Democrats in general, the party in general, is an aspect. Democrats and media work hand in hand, in the same way that Republicans and media work hand in hand. They're almost inextricably linked. When you were looking at the old Podesta leaks with the Sanders material, you could see how the DNC would interact with the media itself in order to put stories. It's almost like they collude in order to create a perspective, per se, or prevailing thought. That prevailing thought is what they themselves deem to be mainstream. Well, it's only mainstream by virtue of the power itself that's centered around a particular belief system. I'm saying this poorly. Think of it this way. Somebody has a ton of money. That person with a ton of money essentially has a media organization. 6 media organizations, for the most part, are really all we have. Everything that we see here outside of the internet is done by those 6 media organizations. Those media organizations are owned by corporations, meaning throughout the entire process, there's a financial incentive built into it. Does the financial incentive allow stories and information to go on that would adversely affect its other businesses or adversely affect itself? Of course not. That would not make sense. The stories and everything that you get, for the most part, is watered down. It's done in a way of saying, this is the prevailing thought. This is what we want you to think. The thing that we want you to think, the mainstream, these boundaries, for the most part, don't threaten this particular power structure, accepts this power structure as natural can be, accepts this power structure as almost just a reality of sorts. Even though it's not a real reality, it's subordinate reality. But that's the mainstream of thought. So the mainstream of thought is threatened by this idea that, wait a minute, is it possible this kid got murdered for something that he did within relation to giving off information to WikiLeaks? Now, the media doesn't like that narrative because that narrative comes across as like a conspiracy theory. But conspiracy theory is a pejorative. Ultimately, they don't like the narrative because it attacks Democrats. It attacks Democrats. It's essentially saying this guy released information. Now, whether or not the release of information had anything to do with why he got murdered, at the very least, the fact that if he was the leak, if he was the person who gave that information to WikiLeaks, then yes, of course you're going to have to look at the DNC. It automatically expands it just by virtue of saying, if this person did X, who would be adversely affected by the thing that the person did? That person has a motive. So I don't think it's this conceptual leap to get to that point. But the first stone in that is, who did the leaks? Did he do the leaks? This destroys the Russian narrative by itself, even if there is no link between the DNC in the sense of how many guy knocked off. Even if there's no link there, you're still in the situation of the Russian narrative that they've spent the last 4 or 5 months foaming at the mouth about. Is bunk. It's bunk. My issue with the story, though, is there is a real family attached to the story. So it's almost like understand the stakes. On one side, you have we don't want to talk about this. This is uncomfortable to one of the parties, and we're intrinsically linked to one of those parties. On the other side, you have, no, we actually want to talk about this because ultimately you're saying that Russia has something to do with why she lost the election. And we, progressives, leftists, are saying she lost on her own merits. Now, Republicans have joined in the case on this also. They're doing so for biased reasons, but they've also joined in the chorus of, no, she lost on her own merits. So in this interesting case, you have this merger between the far left and the right. It's interesting. It's just interesting. It's like war makes strange bedfellows. But in this case, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. You can understand why somebody would say, well, wait a minute. You're saying that the guy who we voted for, Trump, that guy, he didn't get elected on his own steam. He got elected because Russia intervened in the election. Well, you're trying to undermine my particular guy. Now, that's true. That's an interesting perspective coming from a group who thought it was perfectly okay to hassle the other president for his birth certificate. Whatever. Politics is full of hypocrites. In this particular case, they're right. They're right. Progressives are doing it for similar reasons of saying slightly, no, it's similar, but there's a slight difference. For progressives, it's, you lost on your merits. We told you were going to lose, and you lost. You weren't paying attention to the prevailing wind that says progressives were popular. Meaning the things that were coming out of Sanders' mouth was the things that you needed to get elected. So that's where progressives are coming from. Bringing Russia into the mix in some way is almost saying, no, you progressives are wrong. Hillary Clinton was fucking awesome. And she didn't lose because she was a horrible candidate. She didn't lose because she was under FBI investigation for God knows how long. She didn't lose because she was the most hated candidate in politics, with the exception of Donald Trump. Those are not the reasons she lost. She lost because of Russia. Russia intervened into our democracy and choked the hell out of Lady Liberty. That's what they want people to believe. That story is ridiculous. I'm sorry, that story is ridiculous. And up to this point, I understand why Democrats want that story to get out there. I get it. They want to find some reason to justify why they lost without having to have the conversation about why they actually lost. They want the optics of Russia without dealing with the internal aspect of the problems with the party. So I get it. I understand the framework to which we're working on. I guess I'm bringing this up in the sense of understanding where everybody is coming from on this particular story, but also understand that there's an actual real family at the center of the storm. That's all I'm saying. There's a real family. And I would imagine it is absolutely painful to this family to have this politicized in this way. So I don't like talking about the story. But you got to talk about the story. It's just the way it is. It's like I can acknowledge all of the incentives that are built into it. And the incentives to some degree make you feel sleazy. But there is a very specific point to get at. You have one major political party that is screaming Russia at the top of their lungs as the reason to which they lost that election. Hillary Clinton right now, this very moment, is not taking responsibility for losing the election. The DNC is not taking responsibility for losing the election. Democrats, in general, have not taken responsibility for losing the election. Despite not taking responsibility for losing the election. Despite not taking responsibility for cheating Bernie Sanders. They don't want to have the conversation about what's wrong with him. They immediately pivot to Russia. And they're shocked that 15 million people has left the party. You can't even own up why you're wrong. You can't even own up your problems. You're purely pivoting to something else. That's problematic. It's even more so problematic that Sanders has decided to support these guys in doing so. Meaning the guy who they cheated turns around and supports the thing that cheated them. That's problematic all the way around. That's problematic. All of these things end up with this political quagmire of sorts, meaning all these people have access to grind in a sense. The problem is, if he was the leaker, I put it this way, I guess what I'm getting at is, it is massive if he was the leaker. It's massive. And just its political implications is somewhat massive. It undermines an entire story that one of the parties was putting out. It affirms with one aspect of that same party was making, saying, no, it wasn't Russia, you guys just lost. It totally makes that particular part correct. It debunks mainstream media's narrative that there's nothing to see here. It completely debunks it. Now, here's the thing. Who do you trust? Julian Assange, or do you trust mainstream media? Because that's ultimately the conversation that you're having. I saw this conversation with Julian Assange, where Julian Assange did everything but wink and nod at the camera when he was asked point blank, was he the leaker? Let's take a look. We can talk about it after.
Donald Trump has had a disastrous few weeks. If you look at the polls, he needs a miracle. In the American political lexicon, there's such a thing as the October surprise. The stuff that you're sitting on, is an October surprise in there? Do you even know what you're sitting on?
WikiLeaks never sits on material. Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material, and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources are.
But why make the suggestion about a young guy being shot in the streets of Washington?
Because we have to understand how high the stakes are in the United States, and that our sources are, our sources face serious risks. That's why they come to us, so we can protect their anonymity.
But it's quite something to suggest a murder. That's basically what you're doing.
Well, that others have suggested that. We are investigating to understand what happened in that situation with Seth Rich. I think it is a concerning situation. There's not a conclusion yet. We wouldn't be willing to state a conclusion, but we are concerned about it. And more importantly, a variety of WikiLeaks sources are concerned when that kind of thing happens.
Now, come on. He was asked the question point blank. We don't reveal our sources. That's true. Technically, you're not revealing your source, but at the same token, you are. Any look at human interaction, if you were in a movie and the actor was trying to get across to you that, hey, yes, this, right here, pay attention to this thing, God damn it, pay attention to this thing. Julian Assange could not have done any more than what he did in that particular situation. Not to mention, if you're going to debunk the story, you need to debunk this thing of why on earth would he bring this up in this context? The guy is asking him about, the guy says, wait a minute, that was just a robbery. And Julian Assange corrects the guy. They weren't having a conversation about Seth Rich. Julian Assange brought Seth Rich into that conversation with regards of saying, it is a dangerous task to which these people undertake. Whistleblowers. It's a dangerous task. By the way, I'm going to mention Seth Rich. No, I'm not saying he was the source, but yes, I'm mentioning Seth Rich, and we're putting up a $20,000 reward. Who do I trust in this situation? I trust Julian Assange. And it's not because I have this, hero worship of sorts. That's not it. His business is revealing information. If he's found to lie or be fraudulent in any case, it completely undermines the credibility of his organization. He cannot afford to lie. He cannot afford to be caught in any particular situation in that way. So they've had a spotless record. Well, they've continued to have a spotless record. If you ask me, am I going to trust the guy with the spotless record, or am I going to trust the person with something to gain? I'm going to trust the guy with the spotless record. In every other situation, each person in it has an axe to grind to some degree. Julian Assange looked like he's actually bothered by this, so much so he's willing to put up $20,000. Now, you can say he's acting. I'm doubtful of that. You can say that that's not him technically saying that Seth was a leaker. That's true, But it's not a cognitive leap to look at that particular interview and say, yes, he's trying to get across to us that, yes, this guy was a leak. If you're asking me which side I'm falling on that side. Up to this point, I was in the middle. I have no idea where this goes. Mainstream media is saying one thing, everybody else is saying something else, and ultimately each person in the process has something to gain. Well, this interview, Julian Assange is literally winking at the camera. I mean, for the most part, he's winking at the camera. And he's bringing him up in this very specific context of dangerous task, $20,000 in order to find the person who did it. You should pay attention to this. WikiLeaks have been putting out information over and over and over and over again pertaining to this particular case. In which other capacity has WikiLeaks done this? You don't think that's peculiar? Like, why would Julian Assange all of a sudden make such a stink about this very particular issue? He's being adamant about this very particular issue. Could he be doing it just to tar the DNC? It's possible. I don't know why he would do that, but it's possible. What's more likely, though? Is he saying that the guy who worked for the DNC that got murdered at 4 in the morning didn't get robbed because there was nothing taken from him in that sense? Is it possible that that guy got his hands on information and gave that information to WikiLeaks? That's what you're trying to boil it down to. And in doing so, what's more likely? That the person for WikiLeaks has a certain emotional connection with the person because they feel in some way that they may have gotten the person killed. Now, I'm not saying he got the guy killed. What I'm saying is, if Seth Rich is the leaker, it's not crazy to me for Julian Assange to say, we want to find out who did this. I can't reveal the source, meaning I can't say that this guy was the person who gave that information, but I do want to point attention to the fact that that guy got murdered. That seems more likely to me. I mean, it just seems, it seems more likely to me. It seems more likely to me. Let me know what you think, but that absolutely seems more likely to me. It seems like Julian Assange is kind of pointing a finger saying, pay attention to this. Pay attention to this. Mainstream media wants to debunk it. They don't want to pay. But look at it this way. Mainstream media didn't want to have a conversation about the Podesta leaks either. They wanted to be blissfully unaware. They didn't want to have that conversation. All of those things was Russian propaganda and everything else. The media is also wrapped up in this Russian narrative, by the way. They're not indistinguishable from the political class. That's what I keep saying. It's an establishment of sorts. So the question becomes, was Seth Rich the leaker? If he was not the leaker, why is Julian Assange taking such an interest in Seth Rich? If he is not the leaker, why is Julian Assange on television being that over the top and getting across without actually saying that this was the person? All of these things just pile up to me, and all of this boils down to, who do you trust? Well, I believe Assange in this case. I believe Assange in this case. I just think his biases are built around, we can't be caught in a lie. So I lean more towards the side of, yes, he's probably telling the truth. I'm being slightly repetitive. Yes, I know I am. I just want to be very clear on this. Media is not unbiased. Like, media has its biases associated with it. Meaning, they function at the behest of power. Whether that power is Democrats, whether that power is Republicans. They want access. They're not going to do anything that's going to adversely affect access. And right now, the order of things is you have a two-party duopoly. They want access to the two-party duopoly. They feed back and forth in regards to information and the narratives that are put out in that two-party duopoly. So, yes, the media is going to have some level of investment into this process. They're not neutral, even though they may come across as being neutral. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're right. They're trying to debunk something without all the information. And they're trying to debunk something while completely being oblivious or intentionally ignoring what the hell Julian Assange is saying. And this guy has been right in every other context. So, I'll leave it at that. I am leaning on the side of, Seth may have been the leaker, or at the very least, Julian Assange. Put it this way. If Julian Assange is doing something where he's trying to get across something that's not true, then I would err on that side of caution. Meaning, I err on the side of, I'm being hoodwinked by Julian Assange. I don't think I am. I don't see why he would do that. He may have his motives. I don't see why he would do it. So if I'm going to err on the side, yeah, I'm erring on the side of saying Julian Assange is telling the truth. Which means that, yes, Seth may have been a leaker. Which means that, yes, I'm not saying the Democratic Party has something to do with it, but yes, just by definition, you would have to investigate aspects of the party. The presidency is at stake. The most powerful position on the planet is at stake. Are you telling me that people murder for all sorts of reasons? Are you telling me that you would necessarily, that's not an adequate enough reason to have somebody rubbed off the game board? And this is not me saying that they did it. I'm just saying in the sense of an investigation, people who are saying, oh my God, some aspect of the Democratic Party, the DNC had to got murdered. I don't think those people are weird, loony conspiracy theorists. I don't necessarily know if it's true, so bake that into the cake. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that from a standpoint of looking at evidence, and if you can come to some conclusion that says, okay, well, maybe this guy was a leak. And if this guy was a leak, at the very least, Julian Assange is strongly hinting at the fact that he was a leak. If this guy was a leak, then anybody who was adversely affected by that leak would have an axe to grind with that particular guy. Yes, Democrats would have an axe to grind with him. So yes, just by virtue of the process of investigation, yes, you would have to include them. So no, those people aren't crazy for saying, oh my God, the DNC has something to do with this. Whether it's true is a different story. And I'm not even touching that particular story. I'm just getting at this very particular point of the Russian narrative is bunk. And if Seth is the leak, Democrats, including Bernie Sanders, has been engaged in a farce for the past 5 or 6 months because they didn't want to have the goddamn conversation about why they lost the election. And ultimately, they wanted to tar Trump in a way to constrain his particular behavior. At the exact same time, they're red baiting with another nuclear power nation. If he's the leak, all of it goes away. All of it goes away. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.